Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, I'm going to be analyzing the 4 normal mode encounters for Pandemonium Anabaseios, I think that's how it's pronounced, in order to predict some of the Savage mechanics. It's just a fun little thing I like to do to help cope for the wait for Tuesday. I mean, I'm already doing this in my private time. I'm thinking, oh, they're going to do this, that, and that to mentally prepare for Tuesday's Savage race. So I like to share those thoughts with all of you, and I've got some footage that I rounded up with my live stream in order to, well, make an example of it. You should be able to see my mouse cursor right here, although it is quite tiny. It is in the middle of the screen. And as such, I'm just going to go through all 4 encounters in one video. Normally, I would do 4 different videos, but honestly, I just don't want to. So I'll just edit this together so it's one smooth thing. Anyway, with that, let's get started with the first fight, Kokaidos. Now, this is probably going to be the encounter I over-predict the most, or at least it normally would be. It's the first encounter, and my mind always goes super crazy with the things they could do, kind of having to rein myself in, remembering that it is only the first encounter, so there's probably not going to be anything too crazy. So as we start, the big thing with Kokaidos is that it eats souls for a mage, a martialist, and a behemoth, weirdly enough. And with that, it then does its own set of mechanics. Now, I do think all 3 of those souls are still going to be present. I'm not going to predict a 4th soul, a new Savage exclusive soul, but it's definitely on the back of my mind. More so, I expect it to eat 2 souls at once and to have to do shared mechanics between the 2 of them. Still mechanics very similar to the ones that we actually get in the normal mode encounter, but remixed and put together in ways that just force you to use the space a lot more tightly. Now, of course, it starts with a raid wide, but while these first few mechanics are going off, one of the big things I noticed is that the arena is broken up into these sort of pizza slices. Now, you can see the rings, which are used for the ice mechanic that's coming up soon, but I'd have to assume that in Savage, these little lines right here, I can't even find my own mouse on the screen. I'm looking at my mouse in the thing, like on the screen, like I'm looking at my actual cursor right here and like, where's my cursor? But anyway, yeah, so you can see these kind of lines here that make up, as we like to call them, pizza slices. And generally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is usually some sort of indicator for a mechanic. This was especially prevalent all the way back in P1 and just has been prevalent across several encounters. So something we see something we don't see here is probably going to use those things to section off players, and it includes the little sections that are broken off later, which again also remind me of P1. So at the beginning it uses the mages. Now I actually think that the order of the souls might be largely the same on Savage. I don't think we're going to be getting the case where it's 3 different souls and the fight can start with any of them, but only because it's the first encounter. That's something that I would expect from like a 3rd or 4th encounter. I mean, a great example is P8, where the boss literally does that. You know, it can either do snake first or dog first, or dog first, you know, or snake second, dog second. So that's in my head, but I'm not like, I just don't think so for the first encounter. Now, the mage thing is all about fire and ice mechanics, and every time there is fire and ice, my brain defaults to debuff management. So like having an ice debuff and having to be hit by the fire, or having a fire debuff and having to be hit by the ice. Now, all we really see in this first part is the expansion of these fire AoEs, and then we also see the shrinking of the ice AoEs. Now, we do see the AoEs combined with dual spell, and then one of 2 things happens. Either the ice shrinks and the fire stays the same, or the fires grow and the ice stays the same. So you'll see that with dual spell here in a second, but you know, it's just trying to somewhat limit the space that you have. There's also, of course, the chance that anyone hit by a fire that's not supposed to be hit by a fire is going to be on the receiving end of some bad news. But yeah, you can see here's a case where the ice doesn't shrink and the fire just expands, and some people come very close to getting Venn diagram there. But I imagine that if it were to be a case of 3 or 4, it would just be, you know, you just got to be in clock spots, or you just need to be in cardinals or something like that. And then, of course, the raid wide with a bleed. I mean, no one's surprised by this anymore. But with that, we can skip over to the martialist, who I'm really not sure what to predict too much. Now, the knockback from the middle certainly is something, but I'd sooner imagine this happening in conjunction. Like, that's the problem. All of these mechanics are super not telling on their own. But when combined with the other forms, they make a little bit more sense. Like, for example, this form with the Martialist with all these exploding AoEs, you can kind of see the patterns that break out. So you can see here, there's 2 sections off on the side, and then there's these 2 slightly larger sections where you could probably fit 3 people apiece. So, you know, is it going to be like tank flares that need to be out, and then you have, you know, the 6 remaining people need to sprout out in the space? Or maybe, you know, we have to drop AoEs along the side, maybe like the behemoth AoEs we're going to see in a second, and we have to drop them along the side, and that more limits the space. Maybe we have to do this while also having the ice shrinking, which then means you only have these really tiny spaces in the middle, and then you might have something like light parties, for example. So again, it's all about just combining the mechanics, and what I just told you would actually combine all 3 phase mechanics, because there's a light party stack in, actually, is there, no, the light party stack actually is right about here. So I just imagine it would be a little bit sooner. Is it here? I know there's a split. Yeah, here it is. So I'd imagine that this combined with ice, if we go back just a few seconds to this, so imagine if the ice shrunk. So when the ice shrinks, it actually doesn't shrink to the outside of the boss's hitbox. It shrinks to this inner line right here. So that would give you here and here 2 spaces, and then you just have the light party stacks at the same time. There's also, of course, the chance that it's the, like, 2 players get fire and then the other 6 players have spreads, for example. But it's the ice AoE is still there, but it's still a slightly bigger space. It's just that the fire AoEs are expanding. That's what I mean by I really think that combining the souls is going to be the big thing that the boss does. I think it'll do one run through of each of them very quickly, and then it will do pairs. So like, you know, Soul Eater 4 or whatever the heck it's called, Devour 4. It's called Ravening. There you go. Ravening 4, for example, would combine Mage and Martialist. Ravening 5 would combine Martialist and Behemoth, and Ravening 6 would combine Mage and Behemoth. Yeah, that's what I think is going to be the crux. Tank Busters, I mean, that's an Ifrit animation, but that doesn't mean it's going to be similar to the Ifrit Tank Buster. It's very possible to see a tank swap for that, but, you know, that just seems to be like the expected. Front combination and back combination, I think, is going to have, something else happening at the same time, so either light parties, spreads, or a mechanic from one of the others. And I also think it's going to be front-back combination or back-front. I mean, that's kind of just like a given. That was a really easy prediction we made back in P5 as well. Because this is simple, you know, it's either be in and behind or in front, or out and behind and in front. But I expect there to be spreads. I expect it generally in Savage, the easiest thing to default to is add spreads to it. Like, if you ever want to wonder how we think of these things in advance and like how we prepare for these things, literally just think of every mechanic if a spread or a stack was added to it, or a pair mechanic, something that forces players to be in a specific position. It could be conal AoEs coming from the boss. It could be circular AoEs around every player. It could be stack mark. It could be anything, in all honesty. It really doesn't matter. Now, we have these spreads here, and I really think these are going to show up in other phases as well. And these just leave behind puddles that make it so if you step in them, you get the wind dot, and otherwise they just kind of inhibit the amount of space you can knock back to safely. So you see a couple people pick up some bleeds there, which is, I believe that was from touching the outer wall specifically, which I think will probably kill you in Savage. And you have this split damage AoE here. We do also see this tank mechanic coming up for the Behemoth phase, where it jumps from tank to tank and then back to the middle. I suspect this will be there, but again, this is just on its own. This is a dungeon mechanic from Shadowbringers. I mean, for a normal mode raid, that's to be expected. It's literally when the boss jumps to the tank, does the tank buster, jumps back to the middle, like the very last boss in Holminster. And then this is just your standard comment. These are 100% going to be baited by players, and they need to be far enough away from each other. There might be more than one set of them, but the comets 100% baited on players. Maybe one tank, one healer, one DPS if they want to stick to 3. And then maybe there's some other mechanic that sets them off, or maybe you have to preserve them in some way. You have to make sure that attacks don't hit them. That would actually be pretty neat if it was like A11, where you had to make sure these things survive and until this actual point. And then you have 3 different ones for 3 different mechanics. So like the tanks need to go hide behind one. Oh, that would actually be a lot like Heidelin, I suppose, you know, where you have the tanks hide behind one, the healers behind the other, and the DPS behind the last one. So yeah, it's possible that it's player placed. You have to avoid blowing them up by accident, and you have to have 3 different stat groups while the meteor itself is actually going on. So okay, yeah, that's something I hadn't thought of before I just started talking out loud. See, sometimes these videos help me too, because I just want to be able to start making predictions. Now, the second time around, there's not too much different. The biggest thing is actually going into Kokaidos here. We have these fire and ice AoEs. Now, only in here, just one of them expands on the orbs. And again, I expect these to make a lot of appearances. But on top of that, I really, for some reason, my brain told me when the fire one started expanding to stand in the ice one. I didn't do that here, but I did do that the very first time I did it. And, it's not the case, but again, I won't be surprised if some players need to stand in the fire, some players need to stand in the ice, and then there's something else that happens right after. It's just anytime I see fire and ice, I instantly assume that. But unfortunately, that's kind of one of my main predictions for a lot of the encounters for this tier. I can't help but feel like there's going to be a lot of debuff balancing, and I don't know. That's just where I'm placing my prediction, especially with the third fight, where I think that's going to be like the key gimmick. Here, I just think they might do it as like a small gimmick, but there I expect it to be like the most majorist of things. And here you can see the other example of the ice shrinking, but the fire is staying the same. So wanting to squeeze those in and still make sure nobody gets hit. Like if somebody had a fire debuff there, and if they were hit by fire, they would instantly die, then you have to care a little bit more about the positioning there. Or if they have an ice and they need to be hit by fire, then they also need to be careful. But there's all sorts of ways they could go about doing that in terms of damage amplification and stuff. So it's really, really hard to predict. Now, going into this phase, there was really almost nothing to say in addition to this phase. Only thing that happens here is we get the point blank into rear instead of the donut into front. You can get either combo either way, but that was the only real difference with this second part for Kokaidos in his martialist form. And then for the behemoth phase, it was weird because it was like the phase was just in reverse, but it was all the exact same mechanics. In fact, it cut out the Charybdis the second time around. But yeah, it literally goes Comet into Meteor, into the Tank Busters, into, what is it? This, like, the spread or something, I think? Yeah, it's right after that. I think it's right here. Oh, no. This is after he's untransformed. So, yeah, and then this is it. Yeah, actually, this is the end of the phase right here. So, it's just like, I don't know. It's just kind of weird. So, oh, and also one other difference was there was a spread here into a stack instead of a stack into a spread. So, I mean, that was it. That was really the only other noticeable difference. So that's it for the first fight, because then it just repeats from there, so I didn't bother going any further. And I actually feel like this is going to be less difficult than P5, unless, of course, the Behemoth phase has Devour again, which, seeing this, if this ends up being Devour and Savage, that would be so funny. If it's not just Tank Busters, it's something else. But yeah, I don't really have too much else to predict about it, unless they add a new soul with brand new mechanics. I do think it's going to be a lot of these mechanics mixed and matched together with a few extra things thrown in, extra debuffs, extra positioning, more solidified roll stuff. And I think it's going to be a pretty chill first encounter. But that's going to be it for the first encounter here in Anabaseios. And now let's check the second encounter, which I'm far more scared of. All right, here we are with the second encounter, and this one, my mind goes wild. So first of all, we have a very different style of arena than we normally have. However, there's a couple of things I want to point out immediately. One, these green pathways leave behind a stacking dot. Now, if a regular player takes it, it's pretty severe, but if a tank takes it, it's not really the end of the world. And the fact that there's these two platforms on the left and right side, I can't help but feel like the tanks are going to need to take that dot, as opposed to having like a dot on a tank buster or, most of the raid wides. That's going to be like the tank damage that comes from that. It's autos plus whatever that is whenever you need to send them out. On top of that, the side arenas over here are actually the exact same length as the main arena here, which means there's almost certainly going to be knockbacks from one of those platforms. Maybe the tanks have like two line tank busters while we're doing the knockback, and so they take the knockbacks from over there while the rest of the party takes it from the middle part here. But I should let the rest of it play out. Oh, the other thing is that the boss is actually standing on a poison arena, and I wonder if we're actually going to go down there in Savage for even just a short amount of time, like a quick little phase. But yeah, in that case, let's go on to the fight, because the rest of my predictions are probably better seen than heard. So the big other thing with this encounter is the webs. Those pillars off to the side act as players for the sake of the mechanic and in terms of the tethering together. With the main thing here is Silk Spit. So Silk Spit puts 4 debuffs on, well, 4 different players, and if you're too close to another player or one of the little tiny pillars, it actually creates a web between you and whatever other target is actually close enough. That's what these markers are actually for. Now, on the other side, there's actually more to it. You can actually chain webs together to reach further targets. So, for example, you can see that even though the what's it called? The white mage to my right, where my mouse cursor is not actually tethered to this pillar over here. It says they're connected. And the main reason it's saying that is because for a brief moment, it hasn't updated the positioning yet, but all three of these were touching. So you can actually chain together just the AoEs in order to chain the towers together. So it'll make more sense maybe when I show you the other mechanic, but now you can see here like all that. And as they separate, you know, you can see all of the tether differences go away. But the big thing is that if those, oh, okay, so you can see right here, when those players all stood together, even though there's one central player, and you'd think that they would just tether to the two other players, that's not how it works. Everything within the vicinity of any webs and any webs overlapping with other webs creates a tether together. So they all end up tethered, and they actually have to all be broken. Now, standing on one does indeed break them. And while people are tethered, they take damage over time, pretty significant damage over time. And it also massively heavies, which I think is going to be a crucial part of Savage. I think there's going to be what I'm going to call a web check, where if you do not have the web set up correctly, you will just die because you won't be able to use the heavy in order to save yourself or save the rest of the party. Now, these pillars, I don't really have too much to say. So there's only 6 of them here in normal. I wonder if that's going to continue to be the case in Savage, because if my prediction of the tanks being off to the sides for the fight is true for any capacity of it, then, you know, it makes sense to have the 6 here, because then the remaining 6 players need to come up with a system. I'd imagine you would just do your clock spot is your priority. And if there's nothing in your clock spot, then you go like clockwise into center, like clockwise until you hit a player, and then into the center. So that way, you know, my clock spot's actually completely open here. So theoretically, I would be the one responsible for this middle one. However, somebody else runs over, but you know, that's fine, because there's a black mage thing there. I'm surprised they didn't go for it. They went to a different one entirely. And then it leaves these towers behind, and these towers are donuts and point blanks. These have to there has to be either a third type of tower, or there has to be some other AoE overlapping with these, because there's nothing special about these. You know, there's nothing in normal mode to say, hey, you need specific positioning. They're just kind of like, oh, that's what that does, and then you die afterwards. You know, that's all it can really do in normal mode. So I assume that those will be mixed and matched. Maybe there'll be a new one that does like a line AoE or like baits to a player or so. I feel like the function of the towers is probably going to change in Savage to do something that isn't just what we see here. Ultima, just a raid wide, nothing really to say about that. There'll be another set of towers, and the towers is going to show us the donut AoEs. So again, there's not really a whole lot going on here, you know, so you can see that. In fact, hold on, I skipped the animation, which is pretty important, I feel. Here we go. Yeah, so you can see these like ring lights that then fire the donut lasers. Nothing fancy. Then you have this line buster. This thing actually just does a ton of damage. So initially I was thinking this would be light parties in Savage, but this one alone, even if we didn't have all the full stacks, which we do, is actually like super, super hard hitting. Could be a wild charge where the tanks need to stand in front. It's likely to be combined with something, or at the very least, it's light parties. Honestly, that's what I expect most. I don't remember if the boss has a tank buster other than the towers way. Oh, yeah, there's that. Never mind. Oh, it could be that fires at the same time as the other thing, so the other thing becomes a 6-player, or it could be 2 light parties and this at the same time. That is entirely possible to happen. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility for a normal mode, in all honesty. So I'm going to jot that down, make sure I have that. Now, Entangling Web is where it's a little bit easier to see how the webs connect. So you can see that Entangling Web is actually dropping giant web AoEs on the individual pillars. Now, this achieves 2 things. One, there's actually pillars on those outer platforms here. So what this does is it allows these 2 to connect and make a bridge. Now, in Savage, I bet the tank needs to go out to those pillars. One of the 2 tanks will get the mechanic, will get the web, and then you need another player close enough to the web in the center in order to actually web them together. The other possibility is that the tanks have to build bridges, and that's a tank mechanic, because the tank can stand dead center with the smaller AoEs, and build the bridge themselves. It's also always possible that the game continues to make the bridges for us in Savage, and that, it's a lot of prep for stuff we don't need to do. But the other thing that happens here is I let the mechanic resolve, and the thing I was explaining earlier, if any two web AoEs are overlapping, then it creates a chain, and that chain can actually be used to connect webs that are super far away. So you can see this giant web that goes all the way across. The reason that goes all the way across is because of the web chain that we get. So you can see it here. This web right here connects to this web, connects to this web, connects to this web, connects to this web. I feel like should have connected to this one as well. It's like close enough to have done so. And you can also see actual point blank AoEs around these things briefly, which means that they're, I couldn't really see that till now, but you don't want to be standing in the center of the web is all I think it's really saying. Because you can see one that looks like it's kind of here, and then one that's further out. So I guess it's just covering all of the arena that's actually, well, covered. Oh, yeah, it's just a pulsing AoE. Never mind. Yeah, you can see, honestly, until this video, I couldn't see that there was a pulsing AoE under the web to let you know that it was happening. And bam, then you can see that. And I assume what we're going to have to do is build those webs to save ourselves with the heavy at some point, because that heavy is massive. Although I don't know that I trust... Oh, look, those two connected. And the ones in the back connected as well, which is actually the prime example I was thinking of. But these ones where they follow the player, this is where I feel like building the bridge is going to be a lot on us. At least, that's where my prediction is going at the moment. I don't know where else to go with it. Yeah, so those are there. And then we have this Hysteria. I have a feeling there's going to be another half room AoE or light parties or spreads or something. I think there's also going to be a front back or maybe some other mechanic that isn't just it's hitting half the room and it's one half or the other, so don't commit too early. And then, of course, you have the actual bridge mechanic, which will come after Parted Plumes here. What does Parted Plumes do again? Oh, this. Yeah, this is going to be just break up in the light parties and spreads. Like, I don't know. It's going to be something like that. Maybe there'll be something else that happens here, but I feel like that's going to be light parties and rotate together or something. That's a very surface level thing that they could do. If they don't really want to get that creative with it, that's one way to make it a Savage mechanic, I suppose. And then you have this. You have the Tank Buster again, I believe. Yep. And then you have another web. Wow, I forgot how long it takes before you actually get to the bridge crossing. Because, yeah, we have another web mechanic here. And once again, you'll get to see all the webs connect. And this monster that it creates. All these webs. Look at me. Just trying to break them all up. Trying to save some people, man. Yeah, so then that's the bait. He's looking at the only safe spot where we can cross a bridge. And, that's, oh, I'm going to commit early and then catches someone off guard. And then this is the only real mechanic that we see that requires the webs at all in normal mode. And it's just this touchdown where if you're on the platform when this lands, then you die. And there's really nothing else to it. So again, I feel like since that's the only thing in normal, there's going to be at least one more thing in Savage. So I just think it's going to be a lot on the tanks. That's the big prediction when it comes to the webs, that getting across to those correct sections is going to be heavily emphasized on the tanks. So you have another Pandemonic Pillars here. There's not really a whole lot to say. There's another Meltdown too right after, I think. Yeah, and then there's the Meltdown. Yeah, and then there's the only thing that's next, and honestly the big mechanic I expect to force you to make all these webs in Savage is this next one. I think it's called Harrowing Hell. Yeah, there it is. So this is where the boss just repeatedly bashes his face into the arena. Now, this I have a very specific prediction for. This is actually a lot of damage even on normal. You see me not disrespecting it at all. I'm just like, here's a Prognosis Shield, here's a Prognosis Shield. Should have made sure I spent all my Toxicons before that. But this knockback here, it sends you just about the full length of the arena, a little bit less than the full length of the arena. Now, if I was on the third square, so that you can actually look at the rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 rows of these squares. I think the tanks are going to need to inhabit the front 2 to eat the majority of the damage, and they'll also get a bigger knockback. So what you'll need to do is connect these 2 pillars to create, the webbing for them. And then I think the party needs to stand behind those because they've got to make sure they don't break it. And the party will need the web in the back of the room to prevent them from going off. Now, the only thing that I feel like hurts that theory is that, again, the pillars along the platforms along the outside are the same length as the arena itself, which would mean that if the tank stood at the front of those and took the full knockback, they wouldn't be knocked off. So it's possible these are 2 different things that can both happen, But those are like the top things on my mind for this encounter. And I think web control is going to be the theme. You need to make sure you have the webs at the right time. You need to make sure you don't take too much damage from bad webbing. And I think there will probably be some leeway as well. This is just tank buster towers. I honestly, maybe there's something else to these. There's a lot of things they could do with these, but I'm not thinking too much about them yet, in all honesty. A lot of the times the tank mechanics aren't all that interesting, which is why I'm really banking on the webs being the interesting thing that the tanks have to deal with for connecting the bridges. And I think at this point we've basically seen everything for this fight. I don't think there's anything like unique that happens from this point on. But yeah, we just get on to the thing again, and these all get webbed together, and yeah, I don't really think there's much of anything else that happens here. There's more webs, more webs, more webs, Pandemonic Ray. Yeah, it's just like, it's not anything amazing. Now, one big thing about Pandemonic Ray is that it actually gives a hysteria effect that causes you to just run off the arena. So I wonder if there's going to just be a mechanic where we get hysteria and we need to be in the very center of the room. And then there's something to react to right after we get out of all of that. But who knows? I do genuinely think, though, that if the web mechanic is good, this will actually be a pretty good fight. If the web mechanic is not good or they underdo it, then that fight's going to be pretty boring. So that's where I'm at with fight number 2. So let's go on to what I think are going to be the most interesting fights. All right, and here we are with P11 on normal. This one, I feel like I know. Like, now it's there for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of the mechanics feel very, very similar to E11 against Fatebreaker, where it's a lot about the boss has several different mechanics. They can happen randomly. They can happen, they don't happen randomly, but when they happen, which element is used is somewhat random. And I think there's also going to be a mixing and matching where we have dark and light combined AoEs. And I think there's going to be a lot of cases where the boss clones themselves and does these mechanics at the same time. We even see one example of it in normal. I just think it's going to happen a lot more with Savage, with a lot of the usual light parties, spreads, pairs, things like that happening at the same time. Unfortunately, that would mean that most of my predictions would be fairly safe, but there is one mechanic that makes me think that the main theme of this entire fight is going to be balancing light and dark. First of all, that is Elidibus's entire role as Elidibus on the convocation from before the final days. That's why he is ephemeral justice. That's why he is light and dark here and not just dark or not just light or anything like that. Because he defines balance. So that would mean that we see a lot more mechanics that have both of the things in them. But the more important thing, and this is what I mean by, like, if you know Fatebreaker, like, I'm sure everyone has already thought about this if you've done Fatebreaker, where, you know, one's in, one's out, then one's a donut, one's a point blank, and, you know, and that's why I think there's going to be a billion clones. And, you know, it also baits on a player the whole time, and, you know, it'll do something to show you first. This is the mechanic I think is going to be the highlight and will define whether it's a good or bad Savage. The big thing that happens here, we are given a light or dark debuff. All the tanks and healers are given one, all the DPS are given the other. And then we have to step into the opposite color of the one that we get. And that brings us into the balance. It tilts the balance of your ether, and we stand in these to rebalance it. And that gives us a buff called dark. It's called Dark or Light's Accord. I think that debuff is going to be the most key thing for the entire fight, because I don't think that's going to be limited to just these puddles. I think the puddles will play a role, but considering how many AoEs the boss has that are dark or light, I would imagine it would be much more like Nail's Fire and Ice, where, you know, you have a fire stack, you need to get hit by ice to mitigate it. You have an ice stack, you need to get hit by fire. Another great example would be the recent Eureka Orthos final boss, where that's like the key mechanic there as well. But I think it's going to play across a much wider portion of the fight, way more frequent than it does in other encounters. And another big thing, and we'll see it in a little bit, is how you use the space. I do think there's the possibility of needing to break up into 4 pairs and then do it kind of like Barbaricia on Extreme, where you each get your own circle and you have to do the mechanics correctly in your own circle without, you know, messing it up. But then it's even possible that maybe one person needs to get hit to shift the balance of their ether or something like that. There's all sorts of things that are absolutely possible. Because let's say, okay, I have Dark's Accord. Let's say that there's then a light AoE that is undodgeable that is aimed at my section. And it changes me to light's balance. And now I'm standing in the light circle. What if I have to then step out of the light circle, get hit by that, and then shift over to the other one, and we all have to do these swaps where we go back and forth? Then the boss having a light attack and a dark attack, meaning the tanks need to swap as well. And I think that's, again, I just think that's going to be the key thing. You can even see that the auto attack on the main tank, at least let me see if I can see one on the off tank, because I saw it on the main tank right there that definitely looked like it was dark. Like, let me give a quick look right here. So it just stabbed. Oh, maybe that was just them. Oh, that was just them being late and doing it wrong. That's all that was. Never mind. that was the I did the mechanic wrong thing. And these baits also, that's just going to be about, you know, cleverly using the space or whatever. And then Emissary's Will is just a check. Are you in accord with the balance? Like, so you're going to take a hit and you have to fix your balance before Emissary's Will goes off. And the timing will probably be tight. And if you do it wrong, you're probably instantly dead. I don't think there's really much more to it. A big thing is that the Tank Buster also has one dark and one light Tank Buster. So I wasn't paying attention, and I guess I could check here to see which one hits the main tank and which one hits the off tank. But I do fully expect that tank swaps are going to have to be in accords with which one is main, which one is off, because I'm going to assume that when we do certain mechanics, we then get a resistance down to that specific element. Like, oh, I took this light AoE, I now have light resistance down, so I need to get hit by a dark AoE next in order to resolve it. Honestly, I wouldn't be, so that was actually it. So it looked like the main tank got light and the off tank got dark. Yes, that is precisely what happened, as a matter of fact. There you go, you can see it. And yeah, I think that's going to matter. I think your main tank needing to be the dark tank and your off tank needing to be the light tank, and then those swapping is going to be another really key thing that is going to happen. But that's it. Honestly, the rest of the mechanics I don't need to talk about because they all just kind of serve towards that same theory of balancing light and dark. There, I got Light's Discord this time. But so this one's actually kind of a better example. While I'm doing this, there's a light AoE going off. So what if I had Dark's Accord and I got hit by that? And no, I'll tell you, in normal, you just take the damage. It just hurts. You get a Vuln stack, it hurts. But I'm thinking in Savage, like maybe there's a reason that some people want to be hit by this stuff and some people don't. I think it's entirely possible also that you need to maintain a perfect balance of like 4 and 4, and the boss is going to deliberately switch certain people. And by switching certain people, you make it so that where did I want to go with that? You need, like, let's say the boss switches 2 people and there's nothing you can do about it. Then 2 other people need to switch to keep the balance. It's all light and dark. And honestly, this section right here, I expect those 2 targeted AoEs to apply light resistance down, dark resistance down. So, you know, you have the Tank Buster, and if the Tank Buster's on the dark tank, then the light tank needs to take the tether in front of them, which I assume it'll be passable in Savage. For the DPS that gets targeted with the light AoE, if they have light resistance down, then somebody else needs to take it, and the people with dark resistance down need to take it. Another big thing, and this one I think is too obvious. So this multi-hit Tank Buster, Styx, it's the same one as Zodiark, has both light and dark pulses. I think this will be light parties, and you'll need to have the one that is the opposite of your resistance for the entire thing. So you need to have Dark's Accord and be in the light party, and then if you have Light's Accord, you need to be in the dark party. Or it'll just be that each of them gives you light resistance down or dark resistance down or something like that. Or it gives you a resistance up against itself. I don't know. Essentially, I expect it's like Akmorn's in E8, where 2 different light parties need to make sure they never, ever mix and match the elements. You can't have any aggro shenanigans there. You can't have any shenanigans, period, in all honesty. There, it's going to go south really, really quick. Yeah, is there really anything else I need to talk about? Like, it's really just these dark and light things. I don't think anything else of major import happens. It's just divisive ruling and the sigils for the rest of the fight. Yeah, upheld ruling to jump to players, the raid wides. Oh, the messengers. Yeah. I already mentioned these messengers. Another reason why it feels like E11 reminds me of the mist phase. This I expect you'll have to break up into light parties or spreads, you know, and then it could be double dark, it could be double light, it could be dark light. Maybe there's more clones, maybe there's 3 clones, so it's like more like pizza slices. Yeah, and especially because there's a spread mechanic right after, I just imagine it'll be at the same time in Savage. So I don't know. I really hope they surprise me, because I feel like now, having done E11, I'm kind of poised to just predict this. And I don't want that. I do want it to genuinely surprise me. Or at the very least, I need the execution to be engaging. I suppose. As long as it's an engaging execution for a third fight, then I think that will wet the whistle enough for me. But yeah, I don't think anything else happens now that we've seen the clones. I'm pretty sure that's the only other thing that I was really waiting for. So yeah, that's going to be it for the third encounter for my predictions for Savage. And now we only have one more. And unfortunately with the last one, I can't really do the whole thing, but I'm going to warn you now. I am going to spoil you a detail about the Phase 2 boss, because we have the orchestrion rolls in game, and much like with P8S, we know the name of the song for the second phase boss. So I'm going to warn you now that that's coming up in the coming section, so just keep that in mind. All right, and here we are with Theos, or Athena. Yeah, I kind of like calling her Theos because that's what she is. That's like the entity that she is. But Athena is... Man, I hate to say it, but I think it's door boss situation again. I think it's 8 to 8.5 minute phase here, and then 8 to 8.5 minute, second boss. I just think we're getting another door boss, another checkpoint. I'm not a fan of it. I would prefer a 12 to 14 minute encounter that is constant, something like E8 or even E4, going back a little bit further. But that's not what I think we're going to get here. But I actually think this first phase has room to be menacingly annoying, whether it just be from all the flashes from the skills or from the skills that it even has in normal mode. I don't think they're going to go too crazy with debuffs here. I think it's going to be very positioning heavy, much like P8S was. But it's hard to tell because there are a lot of things that look like they could do like more, make sure you have the opposite of this, or using debuffs to designate what you need to be hit by, much like in the previous encounter. But I've already predicted that for the third encounter, so I don't want to also predict that for the fourth one. Now, one of the big things is the boss has 6 wings. And the boss does this Trinity of Souls mechanic where it treats the wings as rows, where it tells you the first row, the second row, and the third row. And that tells you what half of the boss is going to be hit, either the right half or the left half. And you need to just, remember it and go back and forth and do whatever. I think that's still going to be the case with Trinity of Souls. But A, I think something else is going to happen at the same time. And B, I think there's going to be more than just half-room AoEs. I wouldn't be surprised to see point-blank AoEs, donut AoEs, or some sort of other AoE, even stack and spread, and then half-room, something like Cloud of Darkness in E9. So I think this is going to be just slightly more complicated, but I think it's going to be combined with a lot of stuff later. I think the first time we see it, it's going to be very simple. And not this simple, but just, a little more. It's going to surprise people a lot. And then... when we see it later and it's combined with other things, it's going to be an absolute menace. Especially because I expect it to be combined with stuff like Paradema right here, where the boss summons these clones, and these clones do 2 different types of attacks. So some of them do line AoEs, and some of them do, and then some of them do targeted line AoEs. So this is going to be interesting, because I think that there's very likely... So the big thing is that they hit you with white flame, which could just be playing contrary to P8S, where, we had Hephaestus and whatnot, and now we have the white flames. But I wouldn't be surprised if you have debuffs here that, again, determine, if you're supposed to be hit by the white flame or the black flame. So that's, like, again, a really basic prediction to have, I suppose. I also think there's just going to be more of them. I think they'll be staggered. You'll have... what's it called? You'll have 2 different sets of them that need to go off. That's I don't know. I just think that's gonna happen. There's gonna be 8 tethered ones, and you're all gonna need to aim them and not kill each other, while then also doing something else right after. On the soul, just raid wide, nothing fancy to say about that. And then we have the tank buster. This will either be the exact same tank buster as P8, where it's a tank swap, Flame Viper, or it's gonna be a shared tank buster. Oh, you know what? Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if it does the thing where, like, the other tank needs to block for the first tank. I think that's also I think any of those make sense for the line AoE, but I think it's just going to be Flame Viper. Now, this is going to be interesting. So these orbs pull these symbols towards them and then do what the symbol says. I think these are going to be super confusing and savage because they're probably going to throw massive visual effects on them. I think it's also possible that the boss might change what is chained to what in the middle of the travel, so it's like a debate in a sense. But also I think that there could be other things other than donut and point blank. I actually don't think very likely to happen, but I'm at least wagering it as a possibility. And then again, it's going to be combined with a lot of other stuff. I think that one big thing is going to be like, there's going to be multiple donut AoEs, but one of them is actually safe, or these are going to be tethered to players, and when they reach the player, they determine the location of, the donut AoE or the point blank AoE. So it could actually end up looking a lot like P7's Sleepo strat, where you have the donut AoE and then the 3 point blanks, and the 3 point blanks need to make sure there's enough space for everybody else to dodge, but the 3 point blanks are guaranteed to get hit, or maybe there's like a second to adjust in Savage or something. Those are just, again, a few ideas floating off the top of the head. But I do think those, at the very least, some might be tethered to players and some might be tethered to those orbs. And then you'll have to have the player figure out where to bring certain things. So like, it wouldn't be too surprising to see like a ton of the point blank ones, and there's like one possible space, and the player with the donut needs to bring the donut there, and then something else happens at the same time. There are also these ones which use the length of the chain to describe to you the difference in time. I think this is actually a great teaser for how not only they're going to be used later in normal, but how they're just going to be used in Savage. That's probably going to be very important to, you know, have a really good gauge of how much time you have between those. This is just troll. I think this is just going to troll people. I don't even think this particular thing is going to be in it. I'm going to look at you and do this front back knockback, you know, box AoE. I honestly, I don't even think that's going to be in Savage. Maybe, but I don't know. I just don't think it will be. I think it's too simple. I think it's too plain. I don't think it's very interesting. I will say, though, that because it's baited on a player, it could make for a bad situation. Like if a player dodges to a safe spot too soon, they can essentially damn the whole party. And that might be good enough to warrant it being there. It then kind of functions almost like Hot Tail from Nidhogg and Midgardsormr, which, you know, is sufficient. You know, it is sufficient whether it's baited via tether, it's just baited on a random player. Either way, I actually think that's a possibility, but for some reason, I just feel like I won't be there. This destroying the platforms, there's just going to be a lot of really funky use. So one big thing that happens during this is you're no longer able to jump. So I think there's going to be a pattern in Savage where the arena is split in, it's split, what's it called? Symmetrically, where like the northeast 2 platforms and the southwest 2 platforms are the only ones around. So essentially the same thing we have here, except this platform that I'm on to the very right of me, that one I think would be gone. In order, by not allowing you to jump, it wouldn't allow you to cross the gap, because trying to cross that like vertical gap is not something that's really within reason for the game. So I think that that's one big thing, and then you need to split into light parties, and each, you know, set has their own thing to do. I also wouldn't be surprised if which platforms get eaten is based on the player, like those chains being on players, and the players choosing which platforms they need to get rid of. And then if you do the wrong ones, then you can completely screw people. And because you can't jump, if you were to say, let's say that like the northeast platform was around, but the 3 surrounding it were gone, and that player is just screwed. They can't get over there. I mean, even if they could jump, they wouldn't be able to make it. But the idea of the platforms being separated and the lack of jump kind of just eliminates the thought from happening altogether. The only thing I don't like about the not jump is I can't jump to let people know where the safe spot is. So I hope I don't need to do that. And I actually think this is going to happen as well with the line AoEs on the limited space. I think the boss actually does a lot of stuff I would have expected in Savage. I just expect it to be more in Savage, where you have these baited line AoEs while there's less platforms, while the boss is about to get rid of more platforms, while there's other line AoEs limiting the space further. That's actually something I would expect. I just expect like one extra thing on top of it for Savage, especially being the final encounter. And Trinity of Souls, yeah, and then this as well. Like, I really expect Trinity of Souls to make use of the smaller arena like a lot. So that's a big one as well. So that's, yeah. Oh, man, I should probably wrap this up soon because I am getting tired, and we're almost done with all the mechanics, so that's fine. Now, this ad phase, I don't know if it's going to be in Savage. I think the attack from afterwards is going to be in Savage. But this ad, see, here's the thing. There is actually a lot to work with this ad phase, because these AoEs on players that gradually appear, I think those are going to be limit cuts in Savage. Like, I totally think those will be there, whether or not they're part of killing these ads that do like 270-degree AoEs. Like, whether or not they're a part of that, I don't know, and I don't really have much of a prediction for, because I don't think the ads are good enough to like predict that they'll be there. But this attack I expect to be like one of the final things the boss does, this last Ultima here, which we'll be getting into in a sec, talking about Ultimas. Yeah, Theo's Ultima. I feel like this would be the phase transition, or wouldn't be full downtime at the very least. That is like the bare minimum. I don't think there's going to be like a giant full downtime. Here's my ultimate attack. Here's the funny quote that you all made fun of from La Habrea for years. That I don't think is going to happen. And then for the second half, there really isn't too much more to predict. There's more super chain theory, and there's a lot more of other AoEs going off at the same time, like baiting that other AoE and then going here. I've actually seen in normal mode a lot of players bait the knockback AoE to the donut too early, and then you have to step to the side and then go back into it. I mean, that's setting up for the thing I predicted earlier. It's just for some reason, I just don't think that's going to happen in Savage. I just feel like they're going to get rid of that line AoE bait and knockback. I hope I'm wrong. I don't want them to take anything out. I don't want it gone. For some reason, I just have that feeling. And then stack and spread. Ooh, I mean, something else is going to be accompanying. But whenever you see a fight with a stack or a spread, which is pretty much every fight nowadays, you know that's going to get mixed in with other attacks at the same time. So it's just about, before you go into fights, the number one thing I'd recommend you do is memorize every stack and spread ability name, because it's very useful. You can't go wrong with doing that at the very least. And yeah, I don't think there's really anything else here. I mean, the arena shrinks again, like it shrinks to this like set of 3, and I like how they stood on it and died, even though they like got off of it technically. And then this is the bait, you know, maybe again, this is just like if you can completely screw everyone by it being in a really bad place. And then there's the AoE, and then there's the line AoEs and the baited AoE and the tank busters. There's actually a lot that happens at the same time here. Summons the AoEs, these get baited, these players are baiting, there's the 2 line AoEs, there's a tank buster that goes on. Actually pretty chaotic. I didn't notice because it's not very difficult, but a lot goes on at the same time there. And you know what? I love to see that. And then it's on the soul, and then super chain theory again, and there's nothing else fancy to say about that because it's exactly the same as before. And that's it. I mean, that's it for my predictions. Now, I did promise you that I would spoil what I think the Phase 2 boss is. Now, let me be clear. I do think that it's still Theos and that it's Athena. It's her ascended to godhood. However, the orchestrion song for P12S Phase 2 or second form or whatever they decide to do is called Ultima's Perfection Endwalker version. For those who don't know, Ultima's Perfection is Ultima's theme from the Return to Evil East raids and consequently from Final Fantasy Tactics. Or is it from 12 or I think it's from 12 actually. Either way, it's Ultima the High Seraph's theme. And we know the lore behind the Heart of Sabik now, and we know that it very likely was given to Athena from Ultima. I mean, it is the real conclusion. Like, let's be real. The scientists like, oh yeah, probably. And even though it's probably and that's not definitively, come on, we know the truth. And now we especially know the truth because why else would they have their theme here? I don't think it is Ultima the High Seraph, but I think Athena essentially is going to ascend to an equivalent of Ultima the High Seraph and quote-unquote achieve godhood. I also think that means that if you're studying for mechanics ahead of time, you may want to become familiar with any of the High Seraph's mechanics. Now, fortunately, a lot of them are actually here. Those ads that are being summoned, those line tethers and those line AoEs, a lot of that stuff is very present in the High Seraph's encounter. But we also have other things like, you know, the other espers being summoned in that encounter, as well as some of the more cinematic stuff, as well as the ground AoE towers where you need to like intercept the Valkyries as they come crashing down. You have the wind pushing the AoEs. You have the maze with the meteors and like all the AoEs being dropped and the wall closing behind you. Now, I'm not saying all that stuff will be there, but I'm saying that if you're trying to be more prepared, then you will genuinely want to remember those things, write those things down, make sure you understand those things. Oh, but with that, yeah, I think that's going to be a wrap for my Anabaseios. I think I called it Anabaseios a few times. Anabaseios prediction, and as well as an explanation of some of the stuff from normal mode. So, Leave what your speculations and predictions are in the comment section of the video below. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and I will see you all on Tuesday. I'll be posting my clears as I get them on YouTube. I'm probably not doing guides, but I'm probably going to do breakdowns of the encounters for this tier. It's too close to Final Fantasy 16, man. I'm too busy right now. I just got to get through some stuff before it's done. I can't be asked to do this. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll do some, but I'm not going to make any promises. Anyway, I'll see you all in the next video, and until then, take care.